Bitcoin ripping through $50,000. Do you hear it? Do you hear it? 50K Bitcoin. A couple of weeks ago, about 2-3 weeks ago, people were yelling it was going to 20,000. They were saying that it was going to be in a bear market. It was over. Michael Burry, the famous Big Short guy, was screaming and yelling about heads and shoulders and whatever other triangles he draws on charts, because technical analysis is just astrology for grown men. $50,000 Bitcoin. As we continue to say, be responsible, don't short Bitcoin. This thing will rip in your face and take your soul. And that's what it's been doing. Now, if we actually look at the chart itself, we can see that there are some very interesting market dynamics that are playing out. Why I think Bitcoin is going to go much, much higher throughout the rest of this year. So first, let's look at the all-time Bitcoin chart. You can see that Bitcoin basically went from nothing to today at over $50,000. And just when you start to think that it had peaked and it was going to fall aggressively, it has come roaring back. So this is the all-time chart for Bitcoin. If you then look and see the last 90 days, you can see that there is a complete growth. It was under $40,000 90 days ago. Today it's crossed over $50,000. We continue to see healthy growth over that 90-day period. On top of that, this is the Bitcoin price, but we have the Bitcoin realized price. What that means is the actual dollars that are equal to the number of Bitcoin when it last moved. So if I bought Bitcoin at, let's say, $20,000, that's the last time those coins moved, that would be $20,000 towards the realized cap. And so what you see is we have hit an all-time high in the Bitcoin realized cap. That is very, very bullish for the long term. And so our favorite young wizard, Will Clemente, tweeted over the weekend. He said 83% of Bitcoin supply hasn't moved in at least 3 months, and 70% hasn't moved in at least 6 months. So again, what we are seeing is we are seeing the long-term strong hands of Bitcoin. They've been buying up as much Bitcoin as they could at these discounted prices over the last couple of months. And they are holding, and they are not going to sell. And it is the setup for a massive supply squeeze. We've seen from 30 to 50,000 in a very short period of time. My guess is that we will definitely hit $100,000 before the end of the year, as I've been saying since 2019. But on top of that, we will likely blow through that and see a much, much higher price point. How high can we go? I don't know. But I don't think 100K will be the top this year. Again, past performance does not equal future performance. And I don't know the future any better than anybody else. But from a probabilistic standpoint, I like our chances. Another interesting chart around Bitcoin is the fact that the hash rate, once China banned mining in certain jurisdictions within their borders, we saw hash rate fall off a cliff. It then bottomed in July and now has come roaring back. Bitcoin's hash rate today is about where we were in November of 2020. We already have gotten back to November 2020 levels in hash rate. My guess is that we will continue to see this grow at a very fast rate through the rest of this year and likely hit a Bitcoin hash rate all-time high before the year is over. So when you start to look at all of the data, whether it is the price chart, the realized cap chart, if it is the long-term holders, if it is the strong hands, if it's hash rate, if it's even transaction history and volume, you can see that Bitcoin looks very, very healthy on the fundamentals. When you add in the fact that 70% of Bitcoin has not moved in the last 6 months, and if you account for lost coins, it's actually over 80% of Bitcoin has not moved in the last 6 months. It tells you that the strong hands will continue to be strong. And as increased demand comes into the market, my guess is that Bitcoin will go much higher. John and Joe, odds that you guys disagree that Bitcoin's going much higher this year?
Zero.
Zero?
Yeah.
Like not even a chance that we see a lower Bitcoin price before.
Well, there's
the end
always chance. Like, I don't think anyone expected what happened in China to happen, right? So there's always outside things like that could probably impact the price. But when you look at the fundamentals, everything you just mentioned, it's clear that the demand is strong. And as long as those coins are continuously held by strong hands, 70, 80% of the market is not going to move. You can quickly see the price appreciate as more demand comes in the market.
One of the things that I think is drastically underpriced or mispriced in the market is things like the Lightning Network, right? We've shown the chart last week where basically there's parabolic growth in the number of public nodes in the Lightning Network. And I think the more that we see all these underlying fundamentals continuing to move up into the right, what it shows is a high propensity for increase of demand, right? Remember, July was the most growth, the fastest acceleration of users onboarding onto the Bitcoin blockchain in history. 1.2 million people of new demand coming in July. If that continues and you have those strong hands, what do? You get price appreciation. Supply is constricted, demand increases. Of course, if you're a believer of supply-demand economics, the price has to go up to accommodate everyone. My guess is that a lot of corporations, a lot of financial institutions, they were getting excited at the beginning of this year when Bitcoin went from 10 to 30,000. Then went from 30 to 64,000. They got overheated. They got nervous when we went from 64 down to $30,000. But now that we've crept back up to 50,000, there's a psychological barrier that gets broken. And my guess is we're going to see a lot of corporations, a lot of financial institutions start to announce their participation in the industry in a variety of different ways. As we see that occurring, I think it will only lead to more and more demand, and likely towards the end of the year, we will get a massive blow off top. Again, 2017, Bitcoin went from $10,000 to $20,000 in 18 days or so. I don't know what the prices are going to be, but there will be some massive acceleration, blow off top, and then we'll kind of get a cooling off again. And so what people have to remember is the fundamentals are very different than the public narrative or the sentiment on Twitter. If you look at the underlying fundamentals and you believe that the data is the data, what I think about it, what Joe or John thinks about Bitcoin does not matter. The data is the data. It is very, very bullish, right, John?
Yeah. Does it worry you that so many whales are accumulating so much Bitcoin, right? So the problem with a lot of the new coins that people ran into were basically like a rug pull in the sense of the creator would have so much power and so many coins that when he decided to sell his coins, it dropped the price, right? So you've seen whales buy 13,000, 30,000 different like individual Bitcoins in a single day or a single week. Like, does that worry you at all?
No, if you think of Michael Saylor owns 105,000 Bitcoin through MicroStrategy, right? 105,000.
Rookie numbers.
Rookie numbers, yeah, sure. 105,000 Bitcoin. And that's not even 0.5% of the Bitcoin, right? So he didn't even own 1%. He owns 0.5%, a little less than 0.5% of Bitcoin, and he owns 105,000. So somebody who comes in and buys 13, 20, 50,000 Bitcoin, they obviously own even less than he does. And so I think that while the numbers seem big, because we think of, oh my God, somebody bought hundreds of millions or bought $1 billion worth of Bitcoin, it's still a really small number because you have to remember, Bitcoin's a $950 billion asset right now, trillionaire energy. And so it's likely to go back up over $1 trillion by the end of this year, right? And go much, much higher. And so if all of a sudden we start getting into Bitcoin as a $2, $3, $4 trillion asset, again, I don't know where it's going, but let's just say it goes up much more than $1 trillion. Somebody comes in, even if they bought $500 million worth of Bitcoin or $1 billion, or even if they bought $10 billion of Bitcoin, $1 trillion+ asset, it's such a small percentage compared to the overall size of the market.
And I'm assuming that means that just one seller couldn't move the market like that, right? So unless it starts a panic of selling, then one seller can't really affect the market
I mean, listen, if you're selling Bitcoin right now, it's just getting eaten up, right? We saw it to go from $64,000 to $30,000. You had to have a lot of selling, right? The price went down more than 50%. So people were obviously selling in the market. The reason why price goes down is because there's more sellers than buyers, right? The reason why price goes up is because there's more buyers than sellers. And so when you look at that selling, it's not so much was there more selling or less selling, it's who was selling. And Bitcoin provides with that public ledger the first time where we can really see with granular detail who is selling, how long have they held the Bitcoin, where did they buy the Bitcoin in terms of price point, and who are they selling to, what is the historical kind of behavior of those people buying. All of this is on the blockchain with the on-chain metrics. And so what we talked about I felt like a broken record for weeks, if not months, on this show and on the podcast. We talked about over and over and over again, the short-term weak hands, the people who were new to the market, they were the ones selling. They were dumping Bitcoin. They were so scared. They just had the weak hands, the lettuce hands. They were just selling all the Bitcoin. And the people sitting on the other side were the smart money, the strong hands, the people who have been around for a long time. And so what you ultimately got was you got a bunch of people who were buying Bitcoin. I bought a ton of Bitcoin, around $30,000, right? It was discounted Bitcoin compared to what the underlying fundamentals said. And so the more that you saw the price going down, the more that people who have been around for a long time said, oh, wait a second, there's a mispricing in the market. There's a separation between what the on-chain metrics say and what we're seeing with the actual price behavior. This is a good opportunity. Now, they could be wrong, right? But so far in the short kind of perspective of a couple of weeks, Bitcoin went from $30,000 back to $50,000. Looks like all those people were right.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add is that when you look at the distribution of kind of where we're seeing that demand from. So if you think about we're seeing in 2017, we're only seeing 16% of the Google search term or of the trends that we saw in 2017. So from an interest perspective on a retail basis, it's much, much, much lower this time than it was before. Even when we hit an all-time high earlier this year at 60,000, we were only seeing 50% of the same interest in Google. So we've seen the price appreciate 2.5 to 3 times more than it had of the previous all-time high at this point this year. And we're seeing 50% less demand from a retail perspective within Google search trends. So if you look at it from an institutional basis, obviously those institutions are playing. The fundamentals on chain tell you one thing, but you can also look at kind of monitors like this that say, hey, look, there's still probably a lot more retail interest to come here. And as we get to 80, 90, 100K, that's when you start to see all those people flood in and you eventually get that blow off top.
Oh, there's going to be the great FOMO of 2021 is going to happen later this year. And there's a bunch of people, if you go on the street right now and you ask people, how much is Bitcoin worth? The average person will have no clue. There are people who still think Bitcoin is $5,000 from the bear market of 2018 into 2019. There's people who thought that, it ran up a lot earlier this year and then it crashed and it's over. And they might think that Bitcoin's still $30,000, right? If people don't pay attention to this all day, then they have no clue about those intricate price movements. And so what ends up happening is you get a bunch of kind of new media attention, a whole nother media run, right? I went on CNBC this morning. What do they want to talk about? They want to talk about Bitcoin, right? Why do they want to talk about Bitcoin? Prices moving up. All of a sudden, now it's back in the conversation. Last couple of weeks, there weren't a lot of people want to talk about Bitcoin, right? Because the price was down. And so although price ultimately won't matter for Bitcoin in terms of the US dollar exchange price, it is important now because price ends up being a great indicator for the amount of attention it drives. That attention leads to marketing. The marketing leads to user acquisition. The user acquisition leads to more demand. More demand leads to higher price. It's a whole fulfilling kind of cycle. But it ultimately is driven by the fact that 80% of Bitcoin that is known not to be lost and is in circulation has not moved in 6 months. Think about the last 6 months. We're now in month 8 of the year, right? We're in August. That means that Bitcoin went from about 30,000 to 60, back to 30, now it's at 50. Think about that volatility for a second. It doubled, it got cut by more than 50%, and then it went back up again, and now it's at $50,000. And still, 80% of known non-lost coins have not moved in 6 months. Those people are not selling. You literally cannot shake them out of Bitcoin. And so when you have that level of kind of strong hands, what you ultimately get is one, increased demand is going to shoot price up aggressively. And then two is we're also likely to see there is a price point where some of those people will sell, right? It's what happened back if you go back to Q4. In November and December, institutions showed up and said, Joe and John, I want your Bitcoin. I'll pay you $10,000. And Bitcoiners said no. Then they said, I'll give you $12, $15, $18, $20,000. Bitcoiners said no. Then we saw $22, $25, $28, $30,000. No. And eventually what started to happen was once we got over $30,000, we started to see people selling into the market. So there was a price that people were willing to sell at. It just was much higher than where it started at $30,000, or I'm sorry, $10,000. So when we see these high levels of coins that haven't moved in a long time, it usually is then followed by hundreds of % of appreciation. And so if we saw, $100,000+ by the end of the year, I don't think anyone here would be surprised. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching that clip of the Best Business Show. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you know when we go live every weekday, and then head to SoFi.com/pomp so that you can get an account and we can get after it.